On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we speak with Intel on the technology and organizational challenges needed to make network transformation a reality. All right, thanks for joining us today. Well, this week we are joined by Sandra Rivera, who's the VP and GM of the Networks Platforms Group at Intel, to talk a bit about the exciting world of NFV and SDN and what's happening there. So, hey, Sandra, thanks so much for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
Very good. Maybe we'll start off with, for those who don't know how Intel participates in the NFV and SDN world. I can't imagine there are many out there, but just in case, if you want to give a little overview, perhaps, of what Intel's kind of, I guess, core focus when it comes to the world of virtualization.
Well, I'll sort of start with a zoom out, if you will, of Intel and what we describe as our virtuous cycle of growth, which is anchored on two pillars. One is the Internet of Things and all the tens of billions of connected devices and things that enrich all of our lives every day. And then the other big pillar being the cloud and the data center that serves up all the content that we want access to. So if you look at sort of those two pillars and the connectivity between the data centers and the cloud and the network infrastructure, as well as the billions of connected things, that is really what is central to Intel's strategy and growth. In the middle, we talk about some enabling technologies like programmable computing with FPGA technology, and of course new memory technologies that we also have. But essentially, I am in the data center group, which is responsible for powering most of the world's cloud and data center infrastructure. And so it's a pretty good place to be if you're in the network infrastructure business.
And no pressure there at all for that as well, obviously. It's a big part of what's going on out there, so no pressure there.
Yeah, none whatsoever. But it is, I should say it's a lot to aspire to. If you look at our position in data center and cloud infrastructure, we have over 95% of the world's data center and cloud infrastructure runs on Intel server technology. But leveraging that in our market, which is, of course, as you know, undergoing this enormous transformation, it's really a market at an inflection point where server technology, cloud technologies, and virtualization technologies, of course, which are the foundations behind NFV and SDN, are desired, then it really is a wonderful opportunity for us to grow and service all of those customers in that market.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I know when it comes to kind of this move towards virtualization, I think, obviously in the data center world and the cloud world, those markets are pretty well established in terms of their comfort level when it comes to virtualization. I mean, to all these internet companies, it's second nature to them. But when it comes to the telecom space, I know that's kind of what we focus on here. It's kind of a whole new world for these guys. And I know it does seem like there's a bit of a transition going on. Like you said, it's like an inflection point where all that learnings and all the technology from the data center cloud world is migrating now to the telecom space. And there are obviously different requirements in terms of what telecom needs. But I guess as Intel views kind of that transition, what's, I guess, your overall view of how it's going? I mean, is the telecom world, do you guys feel embracing this new trend? I mean, what's, I guess, the general trend of, the vendor and the carrier relationships that are going on? I guess what's your general view of how that's progressing at this point?
Yeah. Well, I would say it's certainly more than a transition. It's really information. Yeah. And if you would have asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have said it was healthy skepticism, a strong desire to embrace server and cloud virtualization technologies, but such a dramatic shift from the way that networks are built and architected today. Right? Today, you have purpose-built equipment that does what it's intended to do very well and very effectively, but it's a very inefficient model. I always use the analogy of, if you have a PC for your Word documents and a PC for your Excel spreadsheets and a PC for your PowerPoint presentations and a PC for your email, it works, but it's highly inefficient. But that's a pretty good description of how networks have been built historically. But because there are billions more devices and because of the way that even humans interact with one another, the amount of social media, the amount of video content, we know that that's growing dramatically over time. And so while there is still a need to build out network infrastructure, it has to be done in a much more cost-effective more intelligent way. And so, you fast forward over the last several years and you see that this industry, although new to these concepts of cloud and virtualization technology, is fully embracing it. And even in some of the surveys that we've done or some of the data that's out in industry, you see that they've moved from, again, that healthy skepticism and sidelines and I don't want to go first to, I think it's over 90% of the network operators globally are now embracing some form of NFV and SDN technology, whether they're in the early stages of proof of concepts and lab trials, or if you're all the way at the other end of the spectrum, like we see some of the market leaders doing, beginning their first sets of commercial deployment. So fully embracing the strategy, albeit with a number of challenges to really get there at scale.
Yeah, sure. That's a good point, right? It does seem like that the market has really transitioned rapidly to this, and it seems like it's been not necessarily forced upon them, but I think operators have noticed, like you said, there's this explosion in data usage. Consumers are bringing more and more devices to these networks. There's 5G around the corner, IoT, all these things, and it really does seem like you're right. The legacy networks, while efficient at what they did, really can't really handle what's coming down the road. It seems, and the operators. Some of the more forward-thinking ones did seem to kind of get the idea pretty quickly that, hey, we need to change things, and moved pretty aggressively. And like we saw, obviously here in the U.S., AT&T and Verizon have been very aggressive in moving down that road. And like you said, they are actually already doing some commercial rollouts at this point as well. But yeah, it does seem like the market has just seen what's coming, and they kind of realized it's a new world out there. We need to kind of change. But again, with the market, with an industry that's been very slow at change in the past. The speed of their change has been pretty impressive to watch. I'm guessing from your point of view, as a vendor out there, it's been a bit of a challenge to kind of maybe keep pace, or at least be on the same page, I guess, in terms of this evolution with what the operators are trying to do.
Yeah, well, so to your point, yeah, it's not your father's telecom industry, right? In terms of the pace of innovation and the willingness to embrace a much more disruptive approach to building, architecting, deploying networks. But it comes with a set of challenges. Sure. And if you look at where we've been over the last several years, I would say much of that time was spent on technical feasibility and proving that indeed you could embrace these different technologies that were leveraged and borrowed from the data center and the cloud, and particularly the hyperscale cloud world, and that you could run network workloads on that type of general purpose processing and server-based infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But I think most of those questions have been answered to the affirmative, right? Can it be done? Yes. Should it be done? Absolutely. And now the questions are a bit more nuanced and a bit more complex in terms of how and where and with whom. And so, how do we begin that whole process of re-engineering our business processes and our approach and our supply chain? With whom do we partner? We have excellent relationships with the existing vendors, the very large telecom and network equipment manufacturers, but we're trying to get on a faster pace of innovation. Does that mean you bring more newcomers and more new market entrants into the equation? And then the with whom, meaning that the skill sets in terms of their own workforce really need to be retrained. And so a lot of the existing folks that would service and deploy and operate the networks are, what I like to call, hardware huggers. You sort of have to move them to a much more of a software model with software skills, and so that brings a whole set of challenges. So it's interesting to have gone from what was, I would say in the first 5 years of this journey, and I think that's probably about as long as we've been at it in terms of this true network transformation is happening, where it was much more about the technical feasibility and answering those technical and architectural questions, to now much more of the business and operational challenges in deploying, and as I mentioned earlier, deploying at scale.
Yeah. Well, I guess when it comes to maybe the technical challenges, yeah, you're right. It does seem like that. I think most people understand that the technology behind all this can support what operators are trying to do. But I guess there's always a bit of a challenge, maybe in terms of the scaling aspect, because it does seem like telecom has certain, I don't want to call them service level or the carrier grade or whatever you want to call these things, but they do have a certain expectation, I think, of their equipment that maybe is a little different than what maybe the data center world is used to. And maybe they're not so different after all, really, but it does seem like there's a perception that telecom, and there's some regulatory issues as well, but telecom does have a certain set of standards that they need to meet. Does it seem like that the technology is ready for that part of it? I mean, I know there's been some limited deployments already. Most of them have been somewhat siloed to an extent, so trying to keep them, a little more under control and kind of see what happens. But I guess as we kind of move forward on this, is the technology there to kind of allow operators to maybe be broader in their deployments and feel comfortable that what they're rolling out will meet their requirements in terms of service levels and things like that?
Yeah. Well, the regulatory issues notwithstanding, because I think that does make this market unique. It turns out that the platform requirements for a communication service provider and for a large enterprise and for a cloud service provider, certainly a hyperscale cloud service provider, are not that different. And one example that I like to use is financial services, which if you look at what they value and what they require to run their business, it is high levels of security, high levels of reliability, high performance packet throughput, low levels of latency. If you think about, again, transactions and transaction times and what they mean in terms of monetization. And all of those attributes are the same attributes that one would ascribe to carrier grade. And so I started to use more the word, hardened, hardened platform, because a financial enterprise, a hospital, anything in the sort of medical services and pharmaceutical industry requires, again, all of those attributes. And if you look at what the hyperscale cloud guys have really accomplished, it is very high levels of reliability and uptime. It probably didn't start out that way, some years back, but at this point, it is delivering on very high levels of service and reliability and uptime, but it's being done much more at the platform and system level in software than necessarily in the hardware. So the platform requirements, the solution requirements are not that uniquely different, but the ways that those industries have approached solving that problem have been dramatically different. And so this is why I'm actually very encouraged when I see these large communication service providers really embracing the idea behind a more software-centric model. And you see them hiring software developers. You see them participating and contributing actively to open source projects, in addition to open standards projects, because 3GPP and ETSI and IETF and IEEE, I mean, none of those are going away, nor do we want them to go away, but they do have to approach the market and the responsiveness and the anticipating of their customers' requirements in a much more agile way. And they really desire to be on a much faster innovation curve than what's been the case up until now.
Yeah, and again, that kind of leads to actually, to the whole evolution and revolution, I guess, of the way the market is looking at this. Because again, you're right. I mean, the old models were they were slow. It took a long time to do everything. And you're right. And now the new model is these things have to be quicker. It's all like in at web time now, where things happen so much faster now. And for operators, obviously, it's a big change. But you're right. I mean, a lot of the operators. It's almost a top-down approach now, where they're saying, it's the top executives saying, "Hey, we're doing this. Everybody has to get on board with this." And that's probably the bigger challenge for them. Really, is not so much, I guess, trusting the technology. It's getting the employees familiar with the new technology, because again, that's probably the biggest change, is really getting them to move away from, as mentioned earlier, the hardware huggers, to more of a software move. But that's kind of what needs to happen. It does seem like that's probably the biggest challenge. I guess as you guys approach that part of it, are you, I guess, working with operators, or what's your view on helping the telecom space, I guess, get over that not insurmountable hurdle?
Yeah, so it is a big challenge, because it speaks to culture, right? Mm-hmm. Culture and workforce and skill sets and business processes, and all those things are gnarly problems, and sometimes even intangibles, right? This culture of innovation and moving quickly, and in a much speedier fashion. But I will say that, our strategy has been to build on what Intel's always done really well, which is to lead on technology innovation with the right building blocks, because of course you have to be able to address those technical questions. Can that be done? Yes, it can be done. Check. Okay, move on to the next problem statement. But beyond that, we have also been a big, of course, supporter and contributor to open source and open standards, and we see this increasing interdependency between the two. It's not one or the other or one against the other, but really one with the other, and an increasing level of collaboration. And we have been both a big contributor on, of course, the standards efforts, but also increasingly in all of the industry open source projects around NFV and SDN, whether it's OpenStack, OpenNFV, Open Daylight, Open vSwitch, the DPDK project. I mean, all of those have been big contributors. So that's another big element of the strategy, and it's encouraging to see, as I mentioned earlier, the service providers, again, more actively participating, even leading, and certainly contributing to those projects. Another big part of that equation, though, is, of course, the creation of an ecosystem. And in an industry where a broad ecosystem has really not existed, when you are delivering solutions in a vertically integrated approach, in a complete solution stack, black box, it works, but your choice and the level of interoperability between the different solutions is not required, right? And it's not something that anyone is working towards. And so that has been a big set of challenges in terms of, okay, how do we drive more of that interoperability? And through the efforts that we've had in our community, our network builders community, it really is our community that's focused on network transformation. We've built out a set of capabilities that really are trying to drive more of that interoperability and that interworking between the different vendor solutions. And then lastly, in this area where you just touched on, which is very much how do we partner with the end customers to address some of those cultural problems, some of those business process problems? The end customer engagement for us has existed historically, of course, in the enterprise, certainly in the cloud, with the cloud service providers. We really have been a key enabler to that industry. But over the last 5 years, we have increasingly developed deep and meaningful relationships with the world's both large as well as tier 2 sort of next wave network operator service providers. And it's through those engagements that we've learned what some of the big challenges are. And it's through really looking at this opportunity as a change transformation problem that we've been working more with the system integrators, which of course, I like to say when somebody takes apart that solution, right, that vertically integrated black box and creates a horizontal layer, someone still has to put it back together and stand behind it. And I think this is really the critical role that a system integrator can play, whether that's a traditional TEM as a system integrator, not necessarily just the total solution provider, whether that is Accenture or Tech Mahindra or Tata. All of these companies at Wipro are getting into this NFV SDN space, and you see them building out these practices around NFV and SDN to help the service providers through that change management and that process of again, that workforce retraining. And then one last piece that we've been quite focused on, of course, is also on that education and skill set piece of it. Part of what we do in our community in network builders is we have and we foster and we host something called Intel Network Builders University. And that has a number of training modules, free, online, web-based, for things like NFV 101 and basics, management and orchestration, choosing a controller technology. What's the right NFV infrastructure to have in terms of your underlying physical capabilities that you need, whether that's for network compute or storage capabilities. Video processing and media processing, how do you land those workloads on an NFVI? And DPDK, right? Just fast forward, plain fast packet processing. So all of those are elements that we also invest in and bring into the fold. And I think that the service providers really do value that role as enabler, because at the end of the day, we don't sell anything directly to them, right? We're not in the solutions business. We're not in that complete, applications business, but we have a lot of the fundamental technologies and ingredients that power those solutions, as well as this commitment to open source, open standards, and open ecosystems.
Yeah, those are actually all great points. I mean, I know when I talk to operators, especially the last topic you bring up, with the fact that, they do need, just getting them the basics for their employees to kind of know what's happening, get them familiar with it and comfortable with it. I mean, even just that is such a great stepping off point for them, just to get everybody kind of in that new direction. And again, there are lots of resources out there to get that going. So there shouldn't be that level of fear like maybe there was a year or two ago, because it does seem like today there is just, again, a broader reach of educational tools out there for everybody to kind of get in the right direction in terms of where we're going in this new world. So definitely. Yeah,
and even what we do at a lot of the industry events now. So I'm on the board of NFV. I'm on the board of ATIS. I'm on the TIA board as well. And a lot of what we've been doing has been more of those, hackathons and interoperability workshops, and just that hands-on experience, so that it isn't so scary and it isn't so foreign, and it's fun, because everyone likes to learn something new, right? And so you really find that the community energizes themselves and challenges one another, and so I think that this is critically important, because you just have to take the first step. You just have to get going and to talk about it and debate about it and PowerPoint it to death.
Those are all fun. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. It's fun for somebody, but you just got to do it. You just got to get going and do it. And we're trying to kind of deliver those on ramps to make it a bit easier for everybody.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I guess maybe one final question, and this is kind of a topic you kind of touched on a little bit already, but it's one that I hear a lot from a lot of people is, I guess the whole issue when it comes to interoperability and standards and things like that. I mean, like you said earlier, the telecom space has traditionally been very, very small vendor community. Everybody kind of provided their own little solution to everybody, to the operators. In this new world, it's now an open community, basically. Obviously with AT&T with their domain program, bringing in new companies involved, and that's kind of the whole central core to all of this movement towards virtualization, is opening it up to new vendors. But I guess is the challenge then is kind of that standards versus open source has always been a bit of a they seem like they're two different or divergent ways to do things, because standards typically seems like a locked-in model, where open source tends to kind of generally be considered more of a wild west kind of thing, almost not quite that bad perhaps, but it does seem like there's a bit of a challenge on getting everybody to understand that standards and open source can mean the same thing to an extent. I mean, obviously you're always adding to an open source platform to make it better, but there are some standards that are also kind of in there as well. They kind of makes it easier for everybody to know what they're working on.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because as I said earlier, we don't see either going away, and they're both essential. And 5G is a perfect example of that, right? For 5G, you are going to need 3GPP to move forward with the air interface and the radio standards, because wherever you are in the world, whether you're using a cell phone or you're connecting on the internet, there has to be that ability to, it doesn't matter, right? That if you're using the radio airways, and if you're using either licensed or unlicensed spectrum, there has to be some approach to how you actually use that technology, and that technology interoperates with one another, regardless of the vendor. But if you look at then, sort of from an end-to-end perspective, in the access network, in the edge of the network, in the core of the network, and then out to the data center and the cloud, you are also trying to drive innovation, where you're embracing projects like OpenStack and OpenNFV and Open Daylight and all the ones that we just spoke about earlier. And so you see that if you're looking at this end-to-end, there is a role, a critical, important role for both to play, and both really help inform and drive each other to go faster. And I wouldn't characterize the open source community as being Wild West at all. They're actually quite structured. It's very meritocratic, right? And so people vote with their feet, which is a bit different from, well, you hire heads to do work for you in standards bodies. So there is that different dynamic, but it is actually quite organized and self-organizing, and and I think in both of those worlds coming together, and we see examples in Etsy where they started they have the ISG, the industry specification group. They started this OSG, right? This open source specification group, because they're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we embrace open source? Because we know that's part of the future. And you see the same thing happening with Addis and TIA and some of the other organizations. So I'm actually very encouraged. I think that these worlds are coming together, and even back to the earlier point about the platform requirements not being that much different. Yeah. Once you get past the acronym soup, you realize that, you know what, we are talking about fundamentally the same types of technologies, the same types of throughput and performance and latency issues, regardless of whether you were born in the cloud natively or you come to it much more from this telecom background.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I guess I should be careful when I say Wild West, because I do talk with the directors there at the OPNFV and upended. If I said that to them, they would kill me. So I don't mean it quite so much like that, but that's kind of a general view. Yeah. But it's definitely not like that. When we talk to those organizations, they're very structured. They've got agendas. They know what they're doing. They're really focused on what they're trying to do. So yeah, I probably shouldn't mess around that word too much. Anyway, well, hey, well, great. Like Sandra, we definitely appreciate getting insight on this today. Obviously. Again, Intel, as mentioned earlier, you guys are very central to a lot of this that's happening in the telecom space. Very important part of the piece. So we definitely appreciate the insight on this. And it was great talking to you. Thanks so much for the time and information today. Well, thanks for watching this week's show. And make sure to check us out again next week when we're scheduled to speak with Argyle Data on how mobile operators are using big data and machine learning technologies for real-time fraud detection, prevention, and profit.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.